Okay, here's a question. I find self-grasping comes up the most when I feel myself is threatened via loss of housing or income. Any suggestions for how to navigate that? Well, those are serious those are serious concerns. But how would you know if you're grasping a self if you haven't done it previously? Selflessness or emptiness is not an antidote to human emotions and human feelings. When we're threatened, or when we're frightened, or when we're grieving, we accept those and we feel them. There's no antidote to feeling them, and nor should you want to. Um, it's pretty helpful to understand that they'll pass. It may not be that the threat will pass. You might lose your home. You might lose your job. Any of us might. And usually when that happens, we find that we have skills and abilities that we never considered. Remember, one of the examples I gave of dukkha in the very first lecture, suffering, is trying to hold on to something pleasurable. You know, I have my house here, my dogs, it's the way I like it. When I was evacuated in the fires last year, it was stressful. I thought, suppose I just come back to charcoal and my guitars are burned up, my paintings are burned up, my photographs, all my possessions. There's nothing I could do about it, so I just had to accept those feelings and understand that we can't get through this life without some kind of attachment. That's the human realm. But if we have practiced kind of deep bathing in emptiness every day through meditation, then we also know that that grasping itself is empty. It's as empty as our life is empty. It's as empty as everything is just a soap bubble. So all these things might happen. But if they're not happening now, and you're worried overmuch about them, I'd say you're not living in the present moment. And meditation will help you. Maybe there are plans you can make in the present moment. But worrying is not going to save your house or your job, or mine, or my life. Oh, Peter, can you talk a little about the idea of loving all beings when some of those beings are truly unlovable? Loving all beings. Well, I know where that's coming from. But the fact that we have self-awareness is like describing our boundaries. If we have self, we have not self. If kindness is a very important value to myself, and I see someone being not kind, it's difficult to love that person. I'm struggling with the word love, but I'm trying to understand it as an exceptional generosity. Meaning we don't say that what that person is doing is fine with us. We don't pretend it's fine with us. But simultaneously, we understand we are that person. And there are probably some circumstances in our life where we will evidence behavior like that person, or we have. And we don't judge ourselves as severely. The thing I like about Zen people, when they protest, is they simply show up and sit. They say, we're here in the middle of it with you. We're not supporting this. We're trying to turn your awareness to this. So I think the demand of yourself that you love everyone is a tall order. I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. But I can certainly remind myself that I'm made of the same stuff as Donald Trump. My spinal telephone is tuned into the human wavelength, and everything human can come across it, from Mother Teresa to Idi Amin. I didn't have a father who was in the Ku Klux Klan. I didn't have a father who taught me dishonesty and always getting the advantage. I don't know what his childhood was like. I'm not forgiving him. I'm not doing anything except trying to express that everything that exists in the present moment came from previous conditions. It's not an accident. And we say that everything's perfect because everything has perfectly fulfilled those previous conditions. So if I understand that it's my small mind that's hating you or hating what you're doing, I can take a step back and I can remind myself that, oh yeah, there's another perspective other than my small mind where we're all ticks on a dog, the dog being the planet or the solar system. So I once had a therapist who told me, I was dealing with tough stuff about my dad. He was a very violent, disparaging guy. And my therapist said something really useful. He said, you don't have to forgive. You don't have to forgive your father for doing things that were unconscionable. He said, but it's your decision as to whether or not you stay angry. So maybe to unpack what you said a little bit, which is, what's your response when people are unlovable? Sometimes I go into murderous fantasies. Sometimes I go into comedic murderous fantasies. I just let them come and go. And then I struggle in political realms, let's say, with ideas and issues and causes that I want to support. But I try to do it without anger, and I try to do it as much as I can without judgment. Because judgment cements me into my small mind. Judgment cements me into comparison. If an unlovable person is creating a problem, there's the problem to be dealt with. We don't have to compound the problem by disordering our state of mind. There was a time in my life where I was studying knife fighting for a year, for a movie, but I got really into it. And one of the things I learned is it's really dangerous to watch the other guy's knife all the time. Because when you watch the knife in his right hand, you miss the knife in his left hand. And at a certain point, when things are going fast and furious and you're blocking and you're slicing and dicing and all this, there's kind of no thought at all. Your training kicks in. Well, Zazen is our training. Zazen is our training to bathe in emptiness. And so people are unlovable. Do what has to be done. You can let the feelings arise. They'll pass if you don't hold on to them. There's nothing crazy about feeling anything. What's crazy, Richard Baker once said, is feeling something and not wanting to feel it. So don't compound your problems by saying, gee, I want to feel differently. Just feel what you're feeling. It'll pass. But do what's appropriate. So, hi Gigi. Let's see. What recommendations might you have for folk like me who are returning to our formal practice after a long hiatus? Well, that's really interesting because I would ask you a question. So I'm just going to pose this to the group because I'm hoping that somewhere in all these transcribed Dharma talks, there's going to be a book, maybe. And I was thinking, what might I call it? And the first thing that came to mind was American Zen, trying to separate it from its Japanese cousin, trying to understand that there's a difference between the gift wrapping that every culture puts Buddhism in, the Tibetans, the Japanese, the Indonesians, the Thai. There's a difference between that gift wrapping and the gift itself. And I'm really interested in loosening the gift wrapping so that Americans can see the gift underneath it. So when you say our formal practice after a long hiatus, I'm not exactly sure what you mean. But to me, the most formal thing that I do is sitting zazen. And formal in the sense of strict, and formal in the sense of being of and pertaining to form. I'm a big believer in form. So I think that if you sit strictly, good posture, good mudra, no pressure, tension, I think if you sit with that question in the background, it will guide you. Maybe you're one of those people that loves formal Japanese kind of practice or Tibetan practice. If so, do that. If you don't have a sangha, if you don't have people to practice with, then you need to kind of invent your own practice for the time being. And I would say pick a time once or twice a day. Make a quiet corner with a candle and a place to light some incense and a chair or a pillow in front of the wall and sit for 20 minutes, sit for 30 minutes. And I think that your practice will answer that question for you. If you're here, you obviously have some intuition about the world that you are acting out and that you want to solidify with consistency and practice. And Zazen will help you be your own teacher. And then when you get in trouble, there are lots of teachers around, and you can ask them. I don't have formal students, but I have people that I have Dharma dialogues with as a peer, Dharma friend or a Dharma uncle. So you're welcome to write me at sfzencoyote@gmail if you want to pursue it in depth. But I have a great belief in Zazen itself teaching you. So I would suggest that. I like this when you said Zen wants you to go where Zen takes you. Aitken Roshi liked to say, when sleepy, have sleepy zazen. When angry, have angry zazen. Just sit there in that blaze of feeling. Yeah, that's exactly. Aitken Roshi was one of my teachers. Wasn't exactly a question, but I appreciate it. It's right. When sleepy, have sleepy zazen. When angry, have angry zazen. Just sit there in that blaze of feeling. Guided meditations are pushing you towards some feeling or some state that you imagine is better than your own state. The miracle is life itself. The miracle is here, that we're alive and feeling in the midst of all this. Don't be afraid of any of it. Don't be afraid of stormy weather in your interior. It's never always sunny. Gary Snyder used to make fun of kind of new age advocates, I used to call them bliss ninnies. Gary used to call the description of their state of mind sexless nirvana. It's all sort of the same thing. You're trying to reduce the universe to a pint instead of the quart it is. You can't fit a quart into a pint glass. It just overflows, and reality overflows all the dimensions and boundaries that we can append to it. The only thing you can control is your intention. And so as Buddhists, we try to fix our intention on compassion. We try to make it operative with the force of habit, so that when we quip, when we say something off the cuff, when we improvise, we've trained ourselves to be compassionate. Rarely perfect. Yours truly confessing. But that's why we call it a practice, and why we say that somewhere Buddha's still working on himself. We don't get discouraged. Here's another question. I know you spoke of counting the outward breaths in meditation, but do you not find that a distraction? Numbers seem clutter or a way to quantify, but in sitting, how useful are they to count? As a filmmaker drummer, counting in meter or in editing gets obsessive. Great question. Thank you. When I was describing counting, I said at one point, when you exhale, it's just one. The entire exhale is one. You're not stepping in line to get to two. You are in the moment of one. And you are covering your entire mind, is covering your body, your posture, your mudra, and your breath. This is why it's no longer a mind-body dualism. It's all mind-body. Not one, not two. So counting is obsessive. I happen to be a counter. It's really funny. It's like some crazy little kid habit. When I'm watering my garden, I'm counting to 25 because I know that's about a gallon of water at the way that I do it. And when I'm doing something that's difficult, I'll be counting the steps, pulling my garbage up the hill. 1, 2, 3. It's some kind of self-comforting kind of deal. But it's quite different than counting in Zazen. Because there's only one. And as a beginner, it's a great way to stay on track. Suzuki Roshi had an experience where he was crossing the creek at Tassajara and he almost drowned. He got sucked down in the water by his robes and he was pulled way down. He was trying to join some kids on the other side. And what he said was interesting. He said, if I really thought I was dying, I could have taken the time to compose myself and just die composed. But I must have felt that there was some hope or something because I struggled. And he struggled diligently. And some people came in and they helped him out of the creek. And he said he went back to counting his breaths after that. He said, I thought there was more work I had to do. So I would say counting is not inherently obsessive. If you're just at one, if you're not thinking of two, there's no obsession. There's no distinction. You just do it. I find it helpful. I was a drummer. I was a drummer for a long time. Rhythm, numbers, I get it. But it's different when you sit Zazen. Or at least it is for me. How do you deal with ego to serve others? Well, so one of the first things that we have to disabuse ourselves is that Zen is somehow about destroying the ego, that Buddhism is about destroying the ego. The ego would never have survived evolution if it didn't have a function. The notion of an individuated self-awareness is not false. It's just not complete. So the ego helps us brush our teeth, wash our face, bathe so we don't smell, put on our mask, use hand wipe, take care of ourselves. The problem is not that we have this organizing principle of awareness. The problem is that we reify it. We make of it a thing, an object. And by habituating to it, we give it a kind of permanence that it actually doesn't have. So Buddha never said that the ego was false or that it existed or didn't exist. What he said was, it's not fixed. So the ego is not a problem unless it's fixed. If you have an idea of yourself, and we all do, and this is one of the things that Zazen helps us soften. You know, you've been told your whole life, you always do this, you're just this kind of kid. I hate it when you. And after a while, you begin to judge yourself that way. We all do. I'm this kind of person, I'm that kind of person, I do this, I wish I didn't, right? And we get this idea of some kind of little guy behind our forehead doing our hearing, seeing, thinking, or a little walnut with our name on it tucked under our liver. It's that fixing of the self that makes it so difficult to change, because really it's just an awareness. And it's not even uncommon to slip the ego. Happens to lots of people all the time. Women have told me that when they knit or crochet, sometimes that they're just gone. I have a friend who's a brain surgeon. He says when he's in somebody else's head, there's no him. He's just there. So one of the things that makes Zazen so effective is that there are certain instances, like as a warrior, as a hunter, as a lover, as a compassionate person, where you don't want to be in the way. You don't want to be asking yourself, how am I doing? God, do I look like a surgeon now? Ooh, I just put my thumb through the guy's brain. You want to disappear into what you're doing. So that takes practice. It takes practice to learn how to either let the self alone or let it get so exhausted it gives up. But it's not your enemy. It's just awareness. And that's the good news. Because the good news is that there's nothing other than your habits that have to change. You're not cast in a certain way. You don't have an armature like a sculptor inside all that clay and stuff that forces you to be a certain way. You are just awareness. And when you get into Zazen and you get into big mind and you get out really outside your ego, you'll see that. And then it'll be more and more available to you. You'll carry that feeling of Zazen longer and longer in your everyday life. And your ego won't be a problem. But we do have to train it. There's nothing, Buddha said that human beings come into earth, that the package comes in with greed, hate, and delusion. Greed, we all understand what that is, wanting. We don't have to call it hatred, we can call it aversion, what we don't like. And then delusion, our, wacky stuff that if we shoot ourselves up with Clorox, we'll kill the virus. Lots of wacky ideas, the domino theory. Capitalism is the only form of human achievement. Humans do this. And one of the reasons that we go and we sit zazen is we let this stuff sink into emptiness. And we realize, oh, wow, it's all woo-woo out there. It's all permeable. It's all malleable. So we have to train ourselves. We have to train ourselves that when we get a little spiteful impulse, it doesn't get past our teeth. When we're jealous, it doesn't get past our teeth. We look at it, we feel it, we understand it. So I have 2 dogs, and it takes work to train them. Just intimacy. Really, I never even had to punish them, but just consistently teaching them things they needed for their own safety. Stop, stay, come, sit. Not much. The rest of them I let be dogs. Humans are more complicated. So there's a lot of stuff we need to housebreak our egos with. But it's not an enemy. It's just the focal point of your awareness, the coordinator of all your senses. So try to be kind to it. Try to be as nice to yourself as you would be to people that you really like. Maybe have time for a couple more. This is a good one. How does a Buddhist engage in social justice without becoming angry? I'd say anger is not the problem. I'd say expressing the anger is the problem. When you understand that it's actually ineffective, when you look at protesters and counter-protests screaming at each other, no one's listening. I even think that our political system has ritualized protest so that you cordon off an area of the street and you put people in it and you let them scream. Nobody's listening to them. Nobody's listening to them because they don't pay to put the legislators in Congress. So the Congress knows they don't work for them. So the question is to analyze the problem you want to solve and then just do it. And when anger arises, just feel it. But I can't think of an instance where it's useful. In my case, when I first went into government work, I was really angry and had a bad mouth and just took no prisoners and succeeded in hardening all my enemies into just a monolithic wall against me until it was brought to my attention what I was doing. And I had to really look at myself and realize that I was acting just like the people that I didn't like. I was in power. I was going to call the shots, and it was payback time. And it didn't work any more than it works in our government. So once I could let go of the anger, then I could see the problem clearly. In the 60s, when the Vietnam War was going on, and there was a draft, there was a lot of moral outrage. There was mass murder going on in our names as citizens. The United States killed 3 million Asians. 3 million. For what? They hadn't attacked us. There was some idea of what I was told I shouldn't refer to these guys as the prep school boys because there are lots of great people who went to prep school. But I think of these policymakers sometimes as people who've just had the best of everything and been convinced that they're entitled and they believe everything they think. The Iraq War would pay for itself, be over in 10 days. So I just don't think the anger serves. I think what serves is intention. And even when you're talking to somebody with whom you fervently disagree, if you can listen to them without judgment and question them without judgment, they change. I can't tell you the number of times that arch conservative legislators from the Central Valley who had gotten to know me and I had gotten to know saved my bacon in Sacramento, voted against me on the record after they got my budget through the legislator. So things happen. Um, and also lurking behind a lot of anger is self-righteousness. I would never do that. I don't have that. I don't have that luxury. I know that I would do anything if I didn't have a firm hand on myself. I have very, very fluid boundaries. And most people do. But most people comfort themselves by thinking that they're good people. I know I'm not. I know that a human being can be anything. And because I know that, it makes me very careful. I know how dangerous I am. So it makes me really pay attention to what I let out past my teeth. Or, not to flip somebody the bird when they cut me off. That's very close to pulling a trigger. So Zazen is the way we practice taming anger. Allowing it, feeling it, making a conscious decision to let it go. Somebody's question disappeared. I was introduced to circular breathing recently. I've been trying it out in my practice, and it's been helping me focus during meditation. What do you think of this technique? I actually don't know anything about it. I would again say that anything you're doing consciously is maybe an imposition on your meditation. That meditation, Zazen itself, a teacher once said, you don't sit Zazen, Zazen sits Zazen. So when you are orchestrating something, when you're making something happen, it's the question of whether or not you're warping the warp. I mean, you could answer, well, you're telling me to sit in an erect posture and do this mudra. That's true, I am. I am. I didn't think these things up. These were the forms I received, and I found the utility in them, so I continue them. And that's probably what you should do. If you find the breathing helps you, do it. If it stops being helpful, let it go. This is a good question. If a transmitted teacher consistently engages in unethical behavior that harms others, does that negate the transmission? I'm a former student of such a teacher, as am I. A Zen master who's not paying attention is just like any other jerk who's not paying attention. Sometimes it's a very tough lesson. There's no moral valence to wisdom. That's a tough one. Deep insight usually awakens bodhicitta, which is the desire to save all beings. It comes from, realizing that we're not artificial flowers. We're flowers. We're dying. Everything's dying in front of us. Everything is passing. And that's a very sweet, melancholy feeling. The Brazilians have a great word called saudade. It has to do with the great longing and sorrow, simultaneous. There's nothing that stops a sociopath from getting a great deal of insight. The transmission really, they used to say, your eyebrows tangle with Buddha's eyebrows. But really, it means you have a great intimacy with your teacher. That you and your teacher are of one mind. and he's certifying that. Some people are different with their teacher. The man that I mentioned, who was quite often unethical, was very different when he was with his teacher. So it doesn't negate the transmission, but it should certainly negate your trust and adherence to that person. Just like Donald Trump will always be the president. A bad president, a destructive president, but he got the title. So the title is what you make of it. And I feel badly for people. Very often, in a lot of Zen communities or Buddhist communities, it's assumed that the teacher is enlightened and everyone else isn't. And people will take their difficulties with the teacher's behavior as evidence of their own limitations. And, while people are working for $5 an hour serving the institution, the guy's driving a gold Rolls Royce. And you say, oh, well, that's my hang up. I mean, man, the guru doesn't have any trouble driving a Rolls Royce. No, I wouldn't have any trouble driving a Rolls Royce either. But I'd have trouble if you were working for $5 an hour to pay for it. So when we say no head above your own, we also mean don't elevate your teacher to a place that's untouchable by common sense, by logic, by intuition. Yes, he or she may be transmitted. Doesn't mean you have to follow them. So I'm actually sorry for that. That's a very difficult thing to deal with. All right, I'm going to look for one more. Let's see. Oh, well, this is interesting. So, hi, Peter. What sparked your interest to practice Zen, and what advice would you give to someone thinking about changing religion, as I'm currently Catholic and losing faith? So, in a very strict sense, Buddhism is not a religion. There are people that practice Buddhism like a religion, and they have forms and ceremonies and all this stuff. But there's nothing miraculous about the Buddha. He was a human being, and he cracked this problem of mutual dependence, interpenetration of things, and saw the emptiness of form, feelings, impulse, sensation, and consciousness. And he worked out a way to share that wisdom with other people and to teach you a way to practice and a way to live which would alleviate unnecessary suffering, meaning mental suffering. Nothing about Buddhism stops an earthquake. However, we don't compound it by mental agitation. So there's really no need to change your religion. The Dalai Lama says, my religion is simple, it's kindness. I've practiced with Christian monks. I've practiced with rabbis. I've practiced with yoga instructors, all sorts of people. In its strictest sense, Buddhism is a practice of living in an intentional, compassionate, and kind way. The only thing you have to take on faith as a Buddhist is that once, 3,000 years ago, in a corner of Nepal, there was a young man named Gautama who was a prince in a kingdom, and he left. He was upset by sneaking out of the palace and seeing old age, sickness, and death, and he resolved to understand it and come to terms with it. But from that point on, his wisdom has been transmitted person to person to person until today. When I was transmitted, I had to fill out a 6-foot-long silk scroll. Talk about nervous making, writing with a Japanese brush pen and ink, the name of every disciple from Buddha 90 or 100 generations down to little Petey Coyote at the end, Hosho Jishi, at the end of that lineage. And that lineage is part of my diploma. So we don't know that each individual was who they said they were. We don't really know who Bodhidharma was, but somebody was Bodhidharma, or that information wouldn't have come to us. So, I mean, there's a lot about Catholicism that's really wiggy, very ceremonial, very faith-oriented practice. You can have your faith shaken, but decide that you like the camaraderie, you like the ceremony, you like the singing, you like the incense, the bells, chants, and whistles, and don't create a conflict with Buddhism. I understand that in religions that have dogma, it can be very difficult. If they say, for instance, my teacher, Aitken Roshi, that we mentioned earlier, as a Buddhist, he began by being strictly pro-life. He would not condone abortions. And then he was so moved by the suffering of his women students that he removed himself from the decision. He said, the decision is yours. If the child is not viable outside your body, it's your decision to carry it to term or not. But he asked two things. He asked that if you decide to get an abortion, that you name the child and that they do a funeral ceremony for it. And I always thought that was profound. I always thought liberals made a big mistake in trying to argue with pro-life people that an abortion is not a termination of life. There are many instances where we choose to terminate life in our culture. I don't hear pro-life people coming out against the death penalty or coming out against war. But it is the termination of life. And by giving it that high seriousness and reserving for yourself, I say yourself, but actually I don't think anyone without a womb should be weighing in on this. I think this is a woman's decision, is whether she's going to carry another life to term, whether she feels she can care for it. Anyway, once again, Zazen will tell you, these are the kind of questions that you put on the back burner. And by that I mean, you just say, all right, I don't have an answer to this question yet. I don't know. Am I going to change my religion? I don't know. You just put it on the back burner. And then every time you have a decision to make, you just sort of visit it. It's there. Do I still feel the same way about it? Has something new come in? And usually at some point, you get a pop, and you'll know what to do.